Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome today's debate. The Prime Minister is leaving, and I do know that she wanted to open this debate, and we understand why she can't. And I wanted to send our best wishes for her speedy recovery, and I'm sure that goes for the whole of the House. Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister had been opening the debate, I think she would have engaged seriously in the points that were being made by others, rather than just hurling easy insults about and not engaging in those points. This is a serious debate about a very serious matter and needs to be conducted in the right way. It's a debate which is long overdue. On this side of the House, we've never accepted that there should be a binary choice between the Prime Minister's deal or no deal. Between very bad or even worse is not a meaningful choice, and it would be a very sorry end to the negotiations. Yesterday, the House overwhelmingly voted to reject the first of those options, the Prime Minister's deal. Today, we have the chance to reject the second. And, Mr. Speaker, we should do so with as big a majority as possible. The mantra that my deal or no deal needs to be dead and buried tonight. I will in just a moment. Labour has always opposed a no-deal outcome. We've repeatedly warned that it would be catastrophic for jobs, for the economy, for security and for peace and prosperity in Northern Ireland. And I'll come to those points later. I do give way.
Honourable Member for giving way, but can I just implore him to use the language of moderation when talking about no deal? He will remember during the referendum campaign dire economic warnings. 500,000 people extra unemployed by Christmas 2016. They didn't come about. So bad were the predictions, the Bank of England had to publicly apologise afterwards. Do not rest his case on predictions. Economic reality is dictated by comparative advantage, such as lower tax rates, more flexible labour markets, and that's why the economy, this economy, is doing so well despite the prospect of no deal.
I'm grateful. Lots of things were said by both sides in the referendum which should never have been said. Some of them by members who've already addressed the House. I will give way.
I'm grateful for giving way. And one of the things that was said time after time after time, that there will be no consequences for peace on the island of Ireland.
Yes.
And we have heard today from the dispatch box, I think, and maybe the Secretary of State might want to come back on it, that a consequence of the government not ruling out no deal tonight is potentially direct rule. And that is a major shift in the government's position. Does he agree with me that those weren't fearful? Right. Those are now the actualities.
I'm grateful for that intervention. I will come to the position in Ireland because it was and it has been treated casually, as if it's all about a technical question of a line in the road. Anybody who spent any time in Ireland in the last 2 years will realise the impact that Brexit is having on the politics of Ireland. The politics of Ireland going well beyond the technicalities of customs union and single market. Now, that doesn't mean we should... I was going to complete my answer because I do accept that we've got to deal with the facts as they are. But one of my concerns is that because so many things were said in the referendum, there's now a licence to pretend that real risks and real outcomes won't happen by simply saying other things didn't happen. And that is a real cause for concern. I did say I'd give way.
Very grateful. Following on from the point of the member of Rushcliffe earlier to the Secretary of State, the Father of the House, and also the correction by the honourable friend from Edinburgh South West to the Secretary of State, the legal correction, we're in a situation where the European Union isn't going to give any other deal. There's 16 days to go. There will be no extension beyond the end of May. And the question that the Secretary of State needs to answer, and a lot of other MPs need to answer, is whether they're going to go for no deal or they're going to go for revoking Article 50. Because that's what it's going to come down to at the end. The European Union, I was in Brussels last week, are fed up with the childish antics of the UK government. The choices are coming between two. I'm not sure if the honourable gentleman is there yet, but he really needs to get, like everybody else needs to get, between no deal and revocation. That's the games in town. Brexit is a busted flush.
I spend a lot of time talking to officials in Brussels over the last 2 years, and I've been discussing the question of an extension for 6 months because it occurred to me back then that we would be in this position. And I think we'll need to address that tomorrow, in tomorrow's debate, but for my part, I have not received the message from Brussels that there's no prospect of an extension, quite the contrary. I'm going to just make some progress, then I'll give way again in a minute. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister used to tell us that no deal wouldn't be the end of the world. Past Brexit secretaries even talked up the merits of leaving on WTO terms, or told us how crucial threatening no deal was to the negotiations. But on this side, we've been steadfast in insisting that no deal is not a viable option. Why? And here it's hard to know where to begin. First, the economy. And here the vast majority of businesses and the trade union movement speak with one voice. And that doesn't happen very often. I've been to meetings with businesses all over the country, and I've spoken to trade unions in those businesses all over the country, and I've taken notes of what they tell me. And at the end of those meetings, you could almost rub out the identity of who was in the meeting and have the same readout of their level of concerns. And that persuades me, I'm going to give way in just a minute, that persuades me that they've got a very good point and they've got a very strong case. Even today, Carolyn Fairburn from the CBI said no deal would be a sledgehammer to the economy. Francis O'Grady from the TUC said a no-deal Brexit will be a hammer blow to our manufacturing industries and the communities they support. A no-deal Brexit could be terminal for Britain's manufacturing and thousands of skilled jobs it provides. And Mr. Speaker, as the son of a toolmaker, I remember when manufacturing was in the doldrums. But now there's been a revival. Manufacturers operate the just-in-time regime, which relies on open borders, and they do so successfully. No deal poses a huge risk to them. I will give way.
He's been talking about what may happen. It's very obvious to me that following his honourable friend's exchanges with the Secretary of State, the government are intent on bringing the withdrawal agreement back for yet another go. Can I make a small prediction? They will go to the European Council on the 20th/21st. They will plead for some additional concession, however small. They will come back to the UK, rerun Maastricht, declare game, set and match, and then try and persuade the House to vote for it. For 50 quid, for Help for Heroes, I bet the third meaningful vote will be on Tuesday, the 26th of March. Will he take my bet?
I don't gamble. Mr. Speaker, I will give way.
Can I thank my honourable friend for giving way? Earlier, the Minister referred to the 140,000 or so companies that trade exclusively with Europe, and only about 40,000 of them have registered and got their EORI numbers, which is necessary to do so. The business community has pointed out that there is no reason why HMRC couldn't give them an automatic EORI number if they are VAT registered, and most of them are, and are very worried that the government is trying to shift the blame for a chaotic no-deal Brexit away from their own lack of support to blame business.
Well, I'm grateful for that intervention. It is a real cause for concern. And in all my discussions with businesses in the last 2 years, but particularly in the last 3 to 6 months, I have detected that while some of the bigger businesses have had the resource to do some planning for no deal, most of the medium and small businesses have said to me, we simply don't have the resource to do it, and therefore we haven't done it, which is among the reasons I've always said that a no-deal Brexit is not a viable option. I'll give way to the late.
My honourable friend has said he's not a gambling man, but it seems the Secretary of State for Wales might be, and he is refusing to rule out supporting no deal. Now, for if one considers Wales, its agriculture, its manufacturing industry and so much more, that is absolute madness in my view. Does the not quite a Secretary of State yet, does the Shadow Secretary of State agree with me?
I do, and it's a real cause for concern. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. My constituency of Bradford South voted to leave, and I'm a Democrat and respect the result of the referendum. But does my honourable friend agree with me that a no-deal Brexit would not be in the interest of my constituents or of this country?
Absolutely right.
Well,
I don't think a no-deal Brexit would be in the interests of the constituents anywhere across the United Kingdom. I will give way in a moment, but I've given away a lot and I do need to make some progress, and I'm aware that others do want to get in to this debate. I was dealing with manufacturing and the impact on manufacturing, and some of the large manufacturers have told us what the impact will be on them. Ford were clear it would be catastrophic for the UK auto industry and Ford's manufacturing operations in the country. Airbus used similar language, absolutely catastrophic for us. And then Honda more recently. If we end up with WTO tariffs, we'd have something like 10% of costs in addition on products shipped back into Europe. That impacts on our productivity and competitiveness. This is not exaggeration. These are companies speaking about their businesses, and this will impact on their business, and real people's livelihoods will be at stake. You don't even have to. I'll give way in a moment. You don't even have to take the word only of businesses and the trade unions, though it's a powerful voice. Look at the government benches. The honourable member for Richmond, still, I believe, a business minister in the government, said that no deal, quotes, would be completely disastrous for businesses in this country. No doubt because, like me, he's been talking to those businesses. He then took the novel approach to collective responsibility by saying, I'm very happy to be public about the dangers of no deal and very happy if the Prime Minister decides I'm not the right person to do the business industry job. He, of course, was backed up by the Business Secretary, who said no deal is fully acknowledged, certainly by me and the industry, as being ruinous for our prospects. And the government's own figures show that no deal would mean, over 15 years, between 6.3 and 9% reduction, and every region would be poorer. Wales, 8.1%. I'll give way in just 1 minute. Scotland, 8%, and the northeast of England by 10.5%. And anybody who votes tonight to keep no deal on the table needs to explain to their constituents why they're taking that risk with jobs and our economy. I will give way.
Very grateful to the Honourable. I think he has mistaken the honourable member for Richmond with the honourable member for Watford in his quote, and I think quite important to make that correction. But what businesses are saying to me is that their key enemy is uncertainty. And if they don't have certainty over the future terms of trade, then investment decisions will be continue to be postponed. There is the certainty of those terms of trade on the 29th of March if we leave the European Union on that day, either with the Prime Minister's agreement or moving to World Trade Organization terms.
As for the anxiety of businesses over uncertainty, that is absolutely true. Absolutely true in terms of their yearning for certainty and the impact it's having on their decision-making and on investments. And I think it should be a cause of great concern to all of us. None of the businesses I've spoken to, and I've spoken to thousands in the last 2 years, have suggested to me that the certainty they want is no deal. They all say to me that they do not want no deal, and they normally point out the consequences of no deal. I'll give way to the honourable lady.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and he's indeed making the point that the worst deal is no deal. And in his points about manufacturing, would he also agree with me, and this has been raised with me as well by GMB, Unite and other unions, that the uncertainty over our trade agreements and how we will be trading, those trade agreements that account for about 12% of our imports and exports, the trade agreements that other countries have done with the EU under which we trade, the uncertainty over those is already causing great problems in relation to manufacturing, imports and exports and jobs in our constituencies.
Absolutely. They have real concerns about that, and they raise them regularly. Mr. Speaker, I will give way, but then we'll move on.
My right honourable friend, I have great confidence in him, and he is making a very good speech. But can I say to him, when this all started, my manufacturing sector was saying surely intelligent people across the benches of this House could come to a relative solution. They have now changed. They are now calling me to push here for a second vote, for a people's vote.
Well, I am grateful for that intervention, because it takes me to a point that was repeatedly made by the Secretary of State, which is that it's somehow somebody else's fault that the deal isn't going through. And that the government doesn't bear any responsibility for failing to bring the House with it. I know I want to make this point because it's an important point. The government has failed to bring the House behind its deal. And it cannot get away with simply saying that is somebody else's fault, it's not our responsibility, we've done nothing wrong. No, I want to make this point because it's a really important point. The Prime Minister and the government had a choice 2 years ago. They could have invited this House to express a view on the type of deal this House would accept, and they refused to do so, repeatedly refused to do so. And anybody in government must have been able to foresee the divisions on their own side. They must have been able to foresee that. And in those circumstances, they would have been much wiser to seek the consensus they may look for now 2 years ago. But not having done it, having been blinkered, having red lines that never came down, to now come here and say it's somebody else's fault that they've rejected the very thing they said they would reject for 2 years is not to take responsibility for their own actions. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to make some progress. Mr. Speaker, I have been concentrating on the economic issues, but there are wider issues in relation to no deal. Northern Ireland. The Secretary of State spoke about Northern Ireland, and we all know how serious the implications are for Northern Ireland. No deal is a risk to the Good Friday Agreement. The government's own EU exit paper makes that clear. No. I didn't mean that rudely, it's just I do need to make some progress. The EU exit paper from the government earlier this year said WTO terms would not meet the government's commitments to ensure no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. That cannot be allowed to happen, and I don't think this Prime Minister would countenance that happening, or the government. Insecurity and counter-terrorism. Mr. Speaker, as honourable members know, intelligence and evidence passes across EU borders in real time every day, and it saves real lives. It requires agreements that can only happen subject to agreements with the EU 27. That is the basis for passing that information and intelligence. But you also need agreement to decide what use you can put to that evidence and intelligence, and crucially to plan joint operations. Now, I know that because for 5 years I was in Eurojust as the Director of Public Prosecutions, being part of that exercise. And I know how seriously the Prime Minister takes it because I worked with her when she was Home Secretary, and she knows full well how that saves real lives. No deal puts that at risk, and no responsible government would take that risk. And if they did take that risk, they wouldn't remain in government for long. I will give way.
Given what he said a moment or two ago, which was absolutely right, the government's repeated failure to seek consensus to get us out of this Brexit mess, will he please reaffirm Labour's firm commitment to our policy of supporting a public vote with Remain being an option on the ballot paper?
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I will, because back in 2017, we made it clear that we would respect the outcome of the referendum, and we set out in our manifesto what we would seek to negotiate if we were elected into government. And that was to seek an agreement that would have the benefits of the customs union and the single market. But in that manifesto, we also said that we would reject as a party the government's red lines, that we would rip up the white paper, and we'd reject no deal. We lost that election. But because we lost, we triggered Article 50, notwithstanding how we had voted in the referendum, and we allowed the Prime Minister to start the negotiations. Consistent with our manifesto, we conditionally said what deal we would accept when it came back. We've now got to a hopeless end, and it is a hopeless end. To lose by 230 votes 8 weeks ago, then to lose by 149 votes is a hopeless end. And the government, as I've said, can't just blame others for that. They need to look at themselves and ask why that has happened. But in those circumstances, both of the things that we were ruling out in our manifesto, the red lines of the Prime Minister and no deal, are the only things on the table, and that is why we support a public vote to protect against those outcomes. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud that we're doing that at this stage of the exercise, and it's obvious why we need to do so. I'm going to... I will give way.
My right honourable and learned, he is my friend in a legal sense, but most importantly this, we're all grateful who believe in the people's vote for the words that he's given. So if such a motion were to be, or amendment, tabled before this House, would he and his party support now a people's vote and get it going up and running?
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition 2 weeks ago, Monday, made it clear that we would support an amendment to that end or put one forward for ourselves. Obviously, timing depends on discussions across the House and with others, but that's the clear position that we put down. Mr. Speaker, I do want to press on. No, I'm going to make some progress. I'm aware other people want to come in, and I'm not being rude, but I really do need to move on. I will, for obvious reasons, because...
Thank you. That's very, very, very gracious of the Right Honourable and learned gentleman, and no surprise, very characteristic of him. The Right Honourable and learned gentleman has been a great friend to Northern Ireland. He has mentioned Northern Ireland earlier in his comments, but didn't spend enough time talking about his assessment of the constitutional risk faced by Northern Ireland if, heaven forbid, the United Kingdom were to leave the European Union without a deal. Would the Right Honourable gentleman reflect upon his assessment of that risk?
I'm grateful for the opportunity to do so, because we face the situation of where there is high anxiety in Northern Ireland and across Ireland as a whole, across all communities and different communities, about the prospect of no deal, because the people of Northern Ireland know that the open border is the manifestation of peace, and there's great concern that if anything happens at that border, it will put back the good work that's happened in the last 20 years. That anxiety and this issue is being debated when some of those elected to this House are not here to make the views they might make on behalf of those that they're voted here to represent, and therefore that voice isn't here. I don't say one way or the other what they should do, but it isn't here in this debate. And the executive in Northern Ireland is not functioning. So the constitutional circumstances that prevail in Northern Ireland, for a variety of reasons, and I'm not casting judgment on them, but the circumstances are such that there could hardly be a worse time to be having this discussion, which has turned into a discussion about the very future of the island of Ireland. And that's why I am impatient with those that think that with a drone and a camera you can somehow deal with the issue that is Northern Ireland and Ireland. You cannot. No, I'm going to press on, because I'm going to press on. I had left... I'm grateful for that opportunity in relation to Northern Ireland. I want to press on, Mr. Speaker, to the impact on health. There will be... No deal would have a huge impact on our health service. It would put real strain on an already overstretched and underfunded NHS, disrupting medical supplies, access to medicines and the ability of hospitals to hire staff. Niall Dixon, who's the Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation, said, and I quote, "No deal and no arrangements to protect patients is simply not acceptable and could put lives at risk." Farming... No, I'm going to make some progress. Farming would also be badly hit. The National Union of Farmers has been clear, I think they set it out this morning, that the proposed tariff regime would be a disaster for UK agriculture, going on to say everything must be done to avoid a no-deal Brexit and the catastrophic impact that this could have on British farming. That's, I'm not quoting voices here of politicians. I'm quoting the voices of those in the field in each of these areas. Finally, on to transport. And as if the Transport Secretary didn't struggle enough already, imagine how he would deal with a no-deal scenario. But it would bring chaos to transport. Hauliers would face hours of delay at new checks would be put in place at borders, and family holidays could be jeopardised by a no-deal Brexit as British travel companies lose their current access and rights. No, I'm going to make some progress. For all those reasons and more, Labour will act tonight and oppose no deal. We support Amendment A, tabled by my right honourable friends from Meriden and Birmingham Erdington, because we believe that is the cleanest and clearest way for the House to express its opposition to no deal. We do recognise that simply opposing no deal isn't the end of the story. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. The House needs to have a chance to debate the steps necessary to move forward, and I think there's a growing consensus that that needs to happen. Labour supports a close economic relationship with the EU, and as I've just said, we also support a public vote. Mr. Speaker, I will give way.
Which one?
to the former attorney, and then I'll give it.
Does he agree with me that the difficulty with the government's motion is that it is in fact inaccurate? Because the fact is that the default position is indeed if we don't ratify or if we chose to revoke, which one could do either of our own motion or after a referendum, for example. And that's why he may agree with me, it's raised these suspicions in the House that the motion is slanted. This may be unintentional, but of course it's within the power of the government potentially to remedy that by a manuscript amendment to their own motion before this debate is over.
Well, I'm grateful for the intervention, and I agree with the interpretation. I think it would be helpful to have it amended, because one thing that hasn't helped in this is for the House to make a decision only to find that weeks later the decision that we thought we'd made is then called into question. So I would invite clarity on that so that we can express a clear vote. I will give way, and then I will give way.
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman. Further to the intervention by my honourable friend, the member for Broxtowe, and with a view to try to avoid the no deal that the majority of this House want to avoid, when the government sort of enters into discussions around extension of Article 50, the other side is going to want to seek a purpose. Does he agree with me that it would be helpful if this House had expressed a view, subject to the Labour Party's public support for a public vote, to that effect in advance of the European Council on March 21st?
Mr. Speaker, if the vote tonight is to reject no deal, and I think it will be, and the vote tomorrow is to seek an extension of Article 50, and I think it will be, but it is only to seek an extension of Article 50, then the question of purpose will be central, will be absolutely central. And that will be a test for the Prime Minister in the first instance, because she will have to make a decision of whether that is the point at which she drops her red lines and her blinkers and opens up the debate to other options. Now, I want to finish this point because it's very important. The Prime Minister needs to decide, if it goes that way to tomorrow, whether she is a Prime Minister willing and able to do that and to embrace other options, or whether she will press on only with her own deal. If she presses on with her own deal, I think we still have to go on and look at other options and get a common purpose. But if the Prime Minister forces us down that road, she's forcing us down the road constitutionally, where the majority will be forcing a view on the executive. And there are constitutional implications for that. So I accept the force of the point that the test will be tomorrow night from that dispatch box, if it gets that far, when we hear from the Prime Minister as to what her then attitude is. If it changes from the attitude for the last 2 years, we might be able to proceed more quickly to find that common purpose. But we do need to find that purpose We need to find a majority for it, and it needs to be a sustainable majority, not just for one night or 1 week. It's what we should have done 2 years ago. It's what we should have done 2 years ago. I did say I'd give way, and I will.
I'm grateful to the right honourable learned gentleman. I don't mean to pause him for too long, but my right honourable learned friend did ask a very direct question to my honourable friend who was opening this debate. Specifically, would he agree to revoke Article 50? I thought his answer was quite clear. It's not the government's policy to revoke. The logic of the position of voting, therefore, not rather to take no deal off the table, at some point, if that is proposed then in the case of the right honourable gentleman's policy, to have a referendum, that he proposes to the other side, the EU, that they would want to delay, and they reject that, either one country or other countries, or the Parliament rejects it. Is it the Labour policy that, in extremis at the end, that they would then want to revoke Article 50 in the sense of the question asked by my right honourable learned friend?
I believe in addressing each problem as it arises, but let me just deal with this question of policy, as if extension is a policy choice of the Labour Party. It's not a policy choice of the Labour Party. It's driven by necessity because of the situation that we found ourselves in. We need to deal with no deal today, and we need to deal with extension tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, no deal should never. No, I'm going to make some progress. No deal should never have been an option. It's the worst possible outcome. Businesses know that. Unions know that. And I suspect most of the Cabinet knows that. It is extraordinary that the government have acceded to a free vote on the matter of such importance today, not to have a position on whether this country should exit the EU without a deal. It is the latest evidence the government is not governing and cannot act in the national interest. I urge colleagues to support Amendment A tonight. We can speak clearly and with one voice that this House will not accept leaving the EU without a deal, and we can bury that so deep that I hope it never resurfaces. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. And Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Mr. Speaker, it's almost 3 years since we had the referendum, and we have reached this quite extraordinary moment. Effectively, we're back to square one. There is absolutely no consensus within the government, within the opposition party, within this Parliament and amongst the public exactly what leave means. And we're having to have a debate today on the question of whether, after 3 years of futility, in 16 days' time, we just give up and leave and see what happens, although I think many of us know and fear the combination of things that are quite likely to happen if you do that. And this is quite bizarre, because it's also still not totally clear, if the House, as I think, votes by a large majority to rule out no deal tonight, quite how we propose to guarantee that we deliver that conclusion. I mean, it sounds as though more attempts are going to be made to reach an agreement, though I voted twice for it, but the government's withdrawal agreement is dead in the water. Any kind of agreement has now got to find some alternative routes. And so in 16 days, we're going to get there somehow, and tomorrow we'll probably vote for an extension. We've got to be clear.